Liberation Day happened. U.S. tariff rates were announced. Now, you've likely heard about these events and the immediate economic ripples, but are these sudden shifts a completely unforeseen black swan, that thing nobody could have possibly predicted, or were there signs? Was it more of a gray rhino, a high-impact event we saw coming but maybe didn't react to? Or could it be something else entirely, a dragon king lurking within the complex global economic system?
That's the core of what we need to unpack today.
Yeah.
It's not just about slapping a label on these events, is it?
Right.
Understanding these different categories really gives you a powerful way to analyze what's happening and, crucially, to think about future disruptions without feeling completely blindsided by every new headline.
Exactly. It can feel like the economic world throws these massive curveballs and we're just supposed to react, but having a framework to understand the nature of these events, whether they truly came out of nowhere or if there were clues we might have missed, feels incredibly valuable.
Yeah, definitely.
So for this deep dive, we've pulled together a really interesting set of sources to help us build that framework. We're looking at the foundational definitions from places like the Corporate Finance Institute and Investopedia.
Good starting points.
We're diving into the more complex ideas behind Dragon King theory with insights from Wikipedia and even some fascinating YouTube discussions featuring Didier Sornet, a key thinker in that area, and Michael McKearns on predicting rare events.
Sornet's work is crucial here, yeah.
And of course, we're grounding this in the real-world impact with news from MarketWatch and The Guardian on the tariff announcements and market reactions. We also have the MAPFRE perspective on black swans and a detailed analysis that really gets into the specifics of this Liberation Day event.
A really robust set of perspectives. Our mission for you today is to take these three concepts, black swan, gray rhino, and Dragon King, and really dissect them. We want to understand what makes each one tick, where these ideas originated, and then, the crucial part, see if we can gain a clearer understanding of this Liberation Day event by applying these lenses. Our goal is to move beyond the immediate headlines and give you a deeper, more insightful perspective on what's actually going on.
Okay, let's start with the concept that's probably the most widely known, the black swan event. When we talk about a black swan, what are the absolute key characteristics?
Think of it this way. A black swan is an event that comes as a complete surprise, something rare with a major impact. And here's a key twist. After it happens, we often look back and think, oh, well, of course that happened, as if it were predictable all along.
Ah, right.
That's that hindsight bias creeping in.
The name itself is quite striking. It's not just a metaphor, is it? There's a bit of history there.
Absolutely. The term has roots in a pre-discovery understanding of the world. Before Europeans encountered Australia, all known swans were white. So the idea of a black swan was literally something unimaginable, symbol of impossibility. The Corporate Finance Institute and MAPFRE both highlight this. It was a common saying to describe something that simply couldn't exist.
So it embodies that feeling of utter shock, something so outside our experience that we couldn't even conceive of it. And Nassim Nicholas Taleb really brought this idea to the forefront, especially with his book Fooled by Randomness, as CFI points out.
He did. And he really crystallized the definition with three key attributes. First, it's unpredictable. Investopedia even notes that sometimes the very possibility of the event is unknown beforehand.
Right, you don't even know it could happen.
Exactly. Second, it has massive widespread consequences, potentially reshaping how we think or how our systems operate, as the Corporate Finance Institute emphasizes. And third, that retrospective predictability, we rationalize it after the fact, even if we had no basis to foresee it.
It's almost a trick our minds play on us, isn't it? To make sense of the chaos by pretending it was all part of some plan.
Well, yeah. It helps us cope, maybe.
But black swans aren't always negative, are they? I remember reading that sometimes these unexpected events can actually have surprisingly positive outcomes.
That's a crucial point. The unpredictable aspect doesn't dictate whether the outcome is good or bad. The Corporate Finance Institute gives the rise of personal computing and the internet as great examples of positive black swans.
No, interesting.
These were revolutionary developments that fundamentally changed society in largely beneficial ways, and it's hard to argue they were precisely predicted in their timing and impact.
That's a really important reminder. Not every unexpected shock is a disaster. So to really solidify our understanding, what are some of the go-to examples of black swan events that people often cite?
There are several historical events that fit the mold quite well. The dot-com crash in the early 2000s, where the speculative bubble in internet companies burst, wiping out trillions of dollars in value.
Right, I remember that.
Both Investopedia and CFI mention this. Then you have the 9/11 terrorist attacks,
Oh.
a horrific event that led to immediate stock market closures and massive financial losses. The 2008 global financial crisis, triggered by the collapse of the housing market and major financial institutions like Lehman Brothers, is another classic example, with truly global repercussions.
Definitely.
Brexit, the UK's vote to leave the European Union, surprised many and had significant financial consequences. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic, with its unprecedented global disruption, certainly fits the criteria.
Unquestionably.
Investopedia also points to events like the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe and the collapse of the long-term capital management hedge fund back in 1998.
So these are all events that caught most people off guard and had really profound and lasting effects. Okay, so we've got a good picture of black swans. Now, let's turn our attention to these gray rhino events. The imagery there is certainly quite vivid. What exactly constitutes a gray rhino?
As our detailed analysis highlights, a gray rhino is a high-impact threat that is highly probable, but for various reasons it doesn't receive the attention it deserves. The defining characteristic is that the warning signs are there, the potential danger is visible, but action to prevent or mitigate it is consistently delayed or insufficient. It's that classic elephant in the room scenario. But in this case, it's a large charging rhino that everyone sees but doesn't quite react to effectively until it's almost upon them.
So, unlike the black swan that seemingly materializes from nowhere, the gray rhino is kind of plodding along in our field of vision, making noise, but we somehow manage to look the other way.
Precisely. Our analysis gives two really good examples: climate change and the 2008 housing bubble.
Ah, okay.
In both of these situations, there was a significant body of evidence and expert opinion pointing towards a major problem, but widespread decisive action was lacking. The risks were known, the potential consequences were understood, but the response wasn't commensurate with the threat.
That makes a lot of sense. We can see the potential disaster looming, maybe even intellectually grasp its severity, but there's a disconnect between that understanding and effective action. Now let's delve into the perhaps less familiar but equally intriguing concept of the Dragon King event. What distinguishes a Dragon King?
Dragon King events, as explained by Wikipedia and the work of Didier Sornet we see on YouTube, are also extremely large and rare events within complex systems. However, and this is a key difference from black swans, Dragon Kings often have some degree of predictability if we can understand the underlying dynamics of the system well enough.
Okay. Predictability.
Yeah, think about things like feedback loops, tipping points, and nonlinear relationships within the system. They're not just extreme outliers. They stand out even against the backdrop of events that follow power law distributions.
So if typical extreme events follow a pattern where bigger events are rarer in a predictable way, Dragon Kings are these massive spikes that are even rarer and larger than that pattern would suggest.
Exactly. Wikipedia points out that in many systems where event sizes follow a power law, meaning small events are common, large events are rare, and the relationship follows a specific mathematical pattern, the very largest events deviate significantly.
Way off the chart.
Way off. They are much bigger than the power law would predict. These are the Dragon Kings, signaling that something unique or unusual is driving these most extreme occurrences.
That's a fascinating distinction. So while black swans are unpredictable due to our lack of knowledge or inherent randomness, Dragon Kings might have precursors or patterns within the system itself that could, in theory, be detected.
That's the idea.
Taleb even referred to them as gray swans, which kind of puts them in this intermediate zone, as Wikipedia mentions.
Yes, Taleb's term highlights that they're not purely unpredictable, but Sornet's emphasis is on the fact that Dragon Kings arise from the specific mechanisms and dynamics within the complex system itself, not just from our limited ability to foresee them.
Right, it's about the system's internal logic.
Precisely. His work, as well as mentions in Michael McKearns' YouTube content, really grounds this in the study of complex systems, nonlinear dynamics, and those power laws we mentioned.
And are there specific characteristics that help us identify a potential Dragon King event as it's unfolding or in retrospect?
Yeah, absolutely. Wikipedia and Sornet highlight several. As we said, they are outliers, significantly larger than expected based on typical statistical models of extreme events in that system.
Got it.
They often indicate a fundamental shift or a departure from the usual way the system behaves. Sornet's research also points to the idea of finite time singularities in certain growth models, like bubbles in financial markets that grow at an unsustainable rate, potentially leading to a Dragon King crash.
Unsustainable growth, like a bubble about to pop.
Exactly. He also mentions that they might not just be outliers in the tail of a distribution, but could show up in how the distribution of events scales at different levels. Positive feedback loops that drive rapid, unsustainable growth in areas like population or market speculation can also be telltale signs.
So we're looking for these exceptional, almost disproportionately large events that might be linked to periods of rapid buildup or unusual behavior within a complex system. What are some real-world examples that have been identified as Dragon King events?
Wikipedia and Sornet provide several examples. The most severe radiation releases in nuclear accidents like Chernobyl are considered Dragon Kings.
Okay.
The largest city in a country, like Paris compared to other French cities, can be an outlier in terms of size distribution.
Interesting.
Some of the most significant financial market crashes, particularly those linked to specific triggering events or periods of intense speculation, have been identified as Dragon Kings. Other examples include extreme intraday price spikes in wholesale electricity markets, the sudden and catastrophic rupture of materials, and even phenomena like epileptic seizures, which share some dynamic similarities with events like earthquakes.
Wow, quite a range.
And importantly, the rapid growth and subsequent bursting of bubbles in financial markets is a key area where Sornet's Dragon King theory has been applied.
It sounds like while all three black swans, gray rhinos, and dragon kings represent high-impact events, the crucial differences lie in our ability to foresee them and the level of awareness we have before they occur.
Precisely. Let's really nail down those distinctions.
Yeah.
When it comes to predictability, black swans are considered fundamentally unpredictable. Even the possibility might be unknown.
Total surprise.
Right. Gray rhinos are predictable in the sense that the threat is clear and visible, even if we choose not to act.
Visible but ignored.
Exactly. Dragon Kings offer a more nuanced picture. While they are rare and extreme, the underlying system dynamics might provide some clues or increase their likelihood as the system evolves.
And how about the probability of these events?
Black swans are defined by their very low probability. Gray rhinos, ironically, are high probability events, even if they are often ignored.
High probability, but we look away.
Yeah. Dragon Kings are rare by definition. They are outliers. But their probability isn't necessarily constant. It can increase as the system approaches critical junctures.
Okay. And finally, our awareness of these events before they happen.
Black swans are unexpected. They come as a surprise. Gray rhinos are known threats. We are aware of them, but we may not be taking sufficient action.
We know, but don't act.
Right. Dragon Kings might have subtle early warning signs within the system that could be detectable with sophisticated analysis, even if they aren't obvious to everyone.
So it's a spectrum from complete surprise to a known danger to something where the potential for a major event might be brewing within the system. Now, let's briefly touch on where these ideas originated. What's the intellectual history behind these concepts?
The black swan concept, as we discussed, has philosophical roots related to the limits of empirical observation and was really popularized by Nassim Taleb. The gray rhino is a more recent, practically oriented term coined to describe the phenomenon of neglecting obvious, high-impact risks.
More practical, less philosophical.
Yes. And Dragon King theory emerged from the field of complexity science, specifically from the study of extreme events in complex systems that exhibit nonlinear dynamics and power laws. Didier Sornet has been a leading figure in developing this theory, building on decades of research into the behavior of such systems, as highlighted in Wikipedia's overview of power laws and extreme value theory.
Okay, we've built a solid foundation here. We understand the definitions, the key differences, and the origins of these three ways of looking at major events. Now for the central question, is this Liberation Day, the day the U.S. tariffs were announced, along with the subsequent economic reactions best characterized as a black swan, a gray rhino, or a Dragon King event?
Right, let's apply the framework.
Let's first look at the events leading up to April 2nd, 2025.
Our detailed analysis provides a clear timeline. We had the significant tariff actions initiated by the Trump administration back in 2018-2019.
Okay, that's important context.
While a trade deal was signed in 2020, the underlying tensions didn't disappear. Then, in 2024, the Biden administration also implemented tariff increases on specific goods from China.
So tariffs weren't exactly new.
Not at all. And importantly, leading into early 2025, there were even reports from reputable sources like Reuters indicating a strong expectation of further tariff measures.
Right, so the idea of new tariffs being imposed by the U.S. government wasn't entirely out of left field. Then came the announcement on April 2nd. What exactly happened on Liberation Day?
On that day, as reported by our analysis and Market Watch, Former President Trump, having declared a national emergency, announced the imposition of tariffs of at least 10% on all imports, with significantly higher rates targeting specific countries.
All imports, that's broad.
Very broad. The stated goal was to protect domestic industries.
And the financial markets certainly didn't take this news lightly. The reaction was quite dramatic.
Indeed, we saw significant drops across the board. Major tech companies like Apple, Amazon, and Nvidia experienced substantial declines in their stock prices. The Nasdaq Composite fell by a notable 6%.
6%? Wow.
In a single day, roughly $2.5 trillion was wiped off the value of Wall Street. The International Monetary Fund even issued a public warning about the significant risk this poses to the global economy.
That's a serious warning.
Interestingly, we also saw a flight to safety, with the 10-year Treasury yield falling below 4%, as MarketWatch reported.
And it wasn't just a one-way street, was it? There were immediate retaliatory measures taken.
Absolutely. China swiftly announced its own set of retaliatory tariffs, imposing a 34% levy on goods coming from the United States. This tit-for-tat action further contributed to the instability and negative sentiment in the markets.
So a trade war escalating quickly.
Pretty much. Our analysis also highlights the specific economic pain points. The German automotive sector faced significant challenges. Garment workers in countries like Lesotho were hit with massive tariff increases, and regions in the UK with automotive manufacturing saw immediate concerns. There were also worries about increased prices for popular US consumer brands and potential impacts on UK pensions and savings.
So we're seeing widespread and significant economic consequences, which aligns with all three types of events we've discussed. But let's try to dissect this through the lens of predictability. Was this Liberation Day announcement a true black swan, something nobody could have reasonably foreseen?
This is where the nuances become critical. While the sheer breadth of the tariffs, a blanket imposition on almost all imports, and the specific timing might have caught many by surprise.
The sheer scale of it, yeah.
The possibility of significant new tariffs was certainly in the air. The previous tariff actions, the ongoing trade rhetoric, and the reports of anticipated measures suggest that the general direction was known. This challenges the core unpredictability aspect of a black swan. However, the magnitude of the announcement and the immediate market shock certainly fit the severe consequences criterion. And as we discussed, the narrative of inevitability will likely emerge in hindsight.
So it's probably not a textbook black swan. How does it stack up against the definition of a gray rhino? Were there enough warning signs that this was a highly probable, high-impact event that was perhaps underestimated or ignored?
Well, the case for this being a gray rhino is quite strong. The years of simmering trade tensions, the precedent of earlier tariff hikes, the public statements and policy signals, all of these pointed towards a potential escalation.
The writing was on the wall, maybe?
To some extent, yes. Economic analysts and news outlets had likely discussed various scenarios involving increased tariffs. This fits the description of a visible, high-impact threat that, while perhaps not precisely predicted in its exact form and timing, was certainly on the radar.
It feels like the warning signs were there, even if the full extent of the Liberation Day announcement wasn't universally anticipated. Now, could this be considered a Dragon King event? Was there an underlying dynamic within the global trade system that might have hinted at an event of this magnitude?
This is the most speculative, but perhaps also the most intriguing possibility. The long-term buildup of global trade imbalances, the increasing political polarization around trade issues, and the potential for a decisive policy shift could be viewed as a complex system approaching a critical point.
Like pressure building up.
Exactly. The Liberation Day event, with its sweeping nature, could be interpreted as an extreme outlier compared to more targeted trade actions in the past. Applying Sornet's framework, one might look for potential bubbles or unsustainable trends in global trade or political rhetoric that could have foreshadowed such a dramatic break.
So it's like all the pressure and underlying tensions within the global economic system might have reached a breaking point, resulting in an event that stands out even against the backdrop of previous trade disputes.
Exactly. While predicting the exact day and the precise tariffs imposed might have been impossible, the underlying dynamics and the trajectory of trade relations could have suggested an increasing risk of a major disruptive event.
As we try to categorize this, it feels like there are elements that align with all three concepts. But if we had to lean towards one, or maybe a combination, what would your assessment be?
It's a complex picture, and ultimately how you interpret it might evolve as we see the longer-term consequences. However, based on the information we have now, The gray rhino analogy seems particularly apt.
Okay, leaning towards gray rhino.
The threat of increased tariffs was known. The potential for significant economic impact was understood, yet perhaps the scale and immediacy of the Liberation Day announcement were underestimated by many. The possibility of Dragon King event also lingers, suggesting that the underlying complexities of the global trade system might have contributed to an unusually large and disruptive outcome. It seems less likely to be a pure black swan given the preceding context.
So, a strong case for a gray rhino with the potential for Dragon King-like characteristics. It really highlights that these frameworks are tools for understanding, and real-world events can often have overlapping elements.
Precisely. These aren't rigid boxes, but rather lenses through which we can analyze the nature of significant disruptions.
Well, this has been a truly illuminating deep dive. Let's quickly summarize for you, our listener. Black swan events are unexpected, rare, and high impact. Gray rhinos are highly probable, high-impact threats that are often ignored. Dragon Kings are extremely large, rare events within complex systems that might have some degree of predictability through understanding those systems.
It's powering.
When we analyze the Liberation Day tariffs, the preceding trade tensions suggest it leans towards being a gray rhino event, potentially with elements of a Dragon King arising from the complexities of global trade.
And now, a final thought for you to consider. As you navigate the news and observe major events unfolding, try applying these frameworks. What other seemingly sudden shifts might actually be gray rhinos you've been aware of on some level? Are there any areas where you see the potential for a Dragon King event brewing within a complex system? Understanding these distinctions can really change how you interpret and react to the world around you.
Powerful insights to take away. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.